It was a mere 4 years ago when the PlayStation 5 generation started, and here we are with a mid-generation refresh. And like the PS4 Pro before it, the PS5 Pro looks to enhance, enrich and improve PlayStation 5 games, but not transform them. The question is, how good the professional shades are this time around.
Whoa, I can roll.
Now, rather than do a traditional review of the console, the reality is, from a setup, use, install and navigation perspective, this is PS5 business as usual, right down to the DualSense 4K 120 output, 48 to 120 FPS VRR range, and even the ability to add an optical drive. Check out the other video on that. In fact, the only time you know you're using a PS5 Pro is the animated dashboard has a specific internal dynamic PS5 chip. You can even take your PS5 M2 SSD from the expansion slot and drop it into the PS5 Pro with the same account and it'll work perfectly. No transfers needed, again covered in another video. Now, all games including PS4, PS5, PSVR 2 and PS Portal are fully supported. In fact, the only thing different is the design, power draw and the power inside. Check out my PS5 base and slim reviews for more on that aspect. Now, the aesthetics are better than the original fat model, mostly because of the black ram air-like grills remind me of my Quacker bikes or many other sport bike designs. The black and white contrast works well. It's more slender, svelte and agile looking. The improved Wi-Fi 7 could help some, but I remain wired always. The manual gives the specs a 40 watt maximum power hike on the PSU over the original 350 watt and I believe 330 watt of the Slim. The manual notes 16.7 teraflops. Long-time viewers know my thoughts on that metric. So circa 2.1 GHz for the GPU clocks. 576GB bandwidth, a hike on that same 16GB of GDDR6 RAM, and a 1.5GB bump in DDR5 over the base PS5's 512MB, which is used as an SSD cache, now bumped up to include games and apps for storage, which allows them to then push more data into games themselves, and as expected, and mirrors the PS4 Pro here. But this is where that 1.x GB of extra game data comes from, and this is needed for the PSSR AI-powered buffer data and increased ray tracing effects and proxy BVH objects that games can now use. Now, all of this is superfluous though to the reasons a console exists: games. Now, the Pro has a clear target to improve PlayStation 5 games to be better and offer a closer level to high-end PC, a target audience for sure, and you can see some tests running before you. The ease, efficiency and simpler experience of a console can never be matched by a PC, but the cost here is also edging into decent PC spec realms. However, this console is aimed at the AV connoisseur, those that want the best of both worlds, and that is a clear growth market. They know who they are, and as such the price can only be judged based on those who want it. Every game I test here and in other videos is available on the much cheaper PlayStation 5. This is a premium choice, therefore this review is based on what level of premium that actually is. So the odd thing here is a brand new console should never launch with no new games. Horizon Zero Dawn comes closest, the remaster, but that launched on PS5 and PC before the review hardware landed and is a remake anyway. It does present some specific Pro modes, and that's something that I'll cover throughout this video in terms of games that offer a mixture of new modes just for Pro, or just take the old modes and enhance them and even remove them all into a single option, which I will call the best of both worlds, something true of a collection of games available within this review window. And this was the raison d'etre from the PS5 Pro's announcement: stop the choice and have both quality and performance in one single mode. But in this launch window, the consistency and success of these, which is a key pillar, was not always a positive one, which is the best time to get into just what the console can do to current games, be them boosted by default or updated by code. Now, disc games first. These can be PS4 or PS5, so long as you have the optional drive added on, like the PS4 Pro and PS5 before it. any current game will use the extra power within the console where possible. The games will vary on results based on a title-by-title basis and even possible SDK versions. Using a classic bad launch version in 2023's Jedi Survivor, the performance mode launched with DRS enabled, FSR2, ray tracing enabled, and at 60 FPS target, but it failed, with it tearing and dipping on base PS5. This was later patched to remove the ray tracing and update the code, which was a success. But it also provides a nice barometer of improvement the console can deliver with no code touched. This same code on PS5 was often into the high 30s, low 40s, and with tearing this looked and felt bad. In addition, it also ran around 720p FSR2, which could impact the image quality. Now just running that same code on PS5 Pro, we see both an image and performance boost in that same RT performance mode. FSR2 is still used, but now that DRS range is at the higher end of that scale, with counts here coming in around 1080p levels. This leaves an image that is closer to the quality mode and benefits from double the temporal data in this mode. In addition to this though, we see no tearing and a fully locked 60 FPS, bar a couple of drop frames that are likely related to the code base of this launch version than any hardware limits. A very nice update and a poster boy for the best case scenario the PS5 Pro can deliver, with this being both CPU, ray tracing and GPU bound, all these elements combined to add circa 30% increase in performance and image quality increases. However, this is not always going to be the case, and in a classic PlayStation 4 title in Bloodborne, we see no increase at all, and that same code base coming into the conversation. Here, the game is limited by code access, memory, CPU, anyway, nothing to do with the base hardware, as 2 generations of upgrades on PlayStation hardware, half in the PS4 Pro, then a full one in the PS5, and now another half in the PS5 Pro, we still suffer from terrible frame pacing and even dips under 30 FPS, and no hardware leaps make any difference at all. We will return to this game a little later in the video though, but fear not, that classic Last Guardian version I covered in my PS5 launch video still runs at that buttery smooth 60 FPS and circa 1920p resolution. Now, another example of boosted base code that also uses ray tracing, albeit software Unreal Engine based, is Robocop Rogue City. On my PS5 Slim review, the exact same code would dip into the low 50s and 40s, identically on fat and slim models alike. Here, on the PS5 Pro though, we're almost a locked 60 FPS, but again, these look more code related than performance and hardware related. So this version certainly has its own issues, but it still delivers a pretty close lock on 60 FPS with no code touched. It's around 25 to 30% faster than both the PS5 Slim and the original. It may still dip in other places, but this really highlights the fact that games that are updated by the developers to better utilize the new architecture, dedicated ray tracing hardware upgrades, PSR solutions from that machine learning hardware boosts, and API and SDK updates will push above and beyond this. But these 3 games give you a good spread of the good, the bad, and the average. And when it comes to using the inherent PS5 Pro boost mode power, it will all be relevant to each title, but more to come on that. What about boosted modes then? Well, as mentioned, Horizon Zero Dawn Remaster has new modes that replace the PS5 version, all with a Nintendo slant of Pro tagged on the end. Quality Pro mode now runs the old 30 FPS resolution mode at 60 FPS. And you see other changes in games such as Stellar Blade, which now adds 2 additional modes over the base PS4 called Pro and Pro Max. Now the former uses PSSR to deliver an improved image quality even over that native 4K 30fps resolution mode, even though the base resolution is significantly lower, circa 1440p level. But it needs VRR as it targets a 50 FPS level of output, but it can still go higher, but it stays within that VRR window around 60-50 FPS, which is better than without, but it's not a fix-all as as many would have you believe, but it certainly is the best way to play, and it looks most stable overall. Comparing this to the other mode, which uses Unreal Engine's TAAU or whatever solution they're using in this actual title, it's certainly far more stable, as you can see here. But the Pro Max mode is actually the resolution mode, just bumped up to a higher frame rate, which is around 80 FPS. And you can see it here in the comparisons. The image quality is practically identical, with the same shimmer and flickering and noise that impacts all versions. Now, this doesn't look to be the best version of PSSR I've seen, of the titles I've been testing, and some other ones that aren't very good as well. But again, this is standard practice because a lot of these will use different versions across time over the SDKs that are available for each developer, each engine. And there has been, or will be, many versions of PSSR that come out over time, just like DLSS, just like FSR. As I said before on my preview videos, these things can evolve because it is a software model that can be updated and adapted and then pushed into the game engine code. And even they can update games just by replacing that with the same code running underneath. So these are all the same options you've got on consoles you have on PC. Stellar Blade is a decent improvement, but it's certainly not game-changing. And we have got some other examples which, although are marketed very well, sadly don't stand up to scrutiny. And that is Alan Wake 2. They have added in ray tracing and improved both modes now using PSSR, and certainly it's drastically better than the previous version on PS5, both in its quality and performance mode, and now you're seeing that full, very expensive ray tracing running on PS5 Pro, which wasn't possible before. Now, this is still very demanding on PC, as I've already covered in my RX 6800 example, which you can see on screen now. This still dips below 30 FPS, but before, this exact same section on the PS5 would dip far more, down to the low 20s. So we are seeing, again, a pretty big update in terms of performance. And in addition to that, the quality and effects being used here is even higher than it was on the base PS5, which didn't even have ray tracing enabled. So this is a balance of both much better performance and visual quality using the hardware, but also shows that PSSR is not a magic bullet on every single game. And this game does require a slightly higher resolution base, in my opinion, to get image quality back to what it looks like on a DLSS powered, more powerful PC on something like an RTX 4070 and upwards. Ultimately, though, it is a welcome improvement in likely a very small amount of time, and this is a game that's over a year old. They've moved on to new things. This is not going to be a full development, and you can see it in the results. There's still some issues that I noted in my review in terms of memory management when you go into the menu. Still seems to impact PS5, which never seemed to impact the Series X console. But overall, it's a welcome boost. It doesn't transform the title, although the ray tracing does have moments where it looks significantly better. But don't expect this to fix all of the issues I covered in my IGN review. Now, it's not all bad news. There are some very good boosts here, ones that really kind of throw out the whole it's CPU bound all the time issues, and just as I surmised with my original look, and that was on Capcom's Dragon's Dogma 2, which was a game that struggled at launch, and again, as I covered over on IGN, it was very heavily CPU bound, certainly on PC and console, and in those towns, it ran very badly indeed. And this was one of the games that I covered in my preview video when I said that it looks and certainly leans into the fact that there's more going on here under the hood, either in the CPU area or the overall architecture of the PS5 Pro. And again, I wanted to test it using the ray tracing elements. And as you can see here, the PS5 version can certainly dip and hover somewhere into the 30s running around this town section. Heavily CPU bound, or at least limited by the GPU and CPU in combination with ray tracing enabled, which has both a GPU and CPU cost and certainly memory cost. Here we see a drastic increase on that, certainly not being CPU bound by the examples here, at least not fully. I think it doesn't hit a flat 60 FPS all the time due to the data CPU impacts, but Dragon's Dogma 2 has additional modes like other titles here where they've actually added in an additional option at the bottom which allows you to turn on both performance, balanced and high quality PSSR modes, and then you can separately disable motion blur and ray tracing. Here I've got both ends of that spectrum. Ray tracing is enabled on both, which is identical settings of ray tracing, but the performance mode in PSSR has a much lower base and the quality mode has a much higher base, so it's leaning more on the GPU in both of these modes. The CPU impact should be exactly identical. And what we can see here is the performance mode holds on to pretty close to that 60 FPS lock, which isn't possible on my PC powered with a 5600X. The CPU is the limit over there on the PC side, again, which I've covered before, and it certainly struggles heavily. Here, I can hold close to 60 FPS most of the time, and even inside the pub, all the people milling around the inn do not impact the CPU heavily, but the quality mode with PSSR has a far better image quality, and it really stands up to looking significantly better than the original title on PS5, and that was much better than the Series X. So PSSR here is likely using a much newer version, and it's been tailored better within the engine, and therefore it hands down is a better example of PSSR over Stellar Blade, which looks pretty good in certain places, but it certainly isn't the best example of how PSSR can change the image quality. Now, in terms of the performance, it does point to the fact that potentially Capcom and Sony have done more here than just a CPU boost in terms of clock speeds. There might be some configuration architecture changes. This doesn't mean that every game that's CPU bound, bandwidth bound, memory bound is going to instantly boost from this, because there's a lot of variations there. You can see this even in the PC space, where my 5800X 3D will not always boost games to the same level. It's all dependent on how the code is managed and how efficient that code is already. So there are benefits from some and not so many benefits from others. It all depends. It swings and roundabouts. One swallow does not a summer make. So this doesn't mean that we're going to get every game that's CPU bound, but this certainly points to a game that is clearly CPU bound in the PC space, not being bound anywhere near the same way here, and that is with ray tracing and far superior image quality. But it's still early days, and I will be digging into this far more, so stay tuned to the channel. So wrapping all up the games that I've covered so far, many more to come. There wasn't a huge amount of games that I thought I'd be able to cover. So F124 is a massive standout in terms of it incorporates everything. 120 FPS, PSSR, the best ray tracing I've seen in a game in terms of the quality. This is a standout title. This is a game that you should rush out and buy if you like racing games. It runs beautifully on here. But it also highlights that I still think the whole kind of environment of the PS5 Pro is still early days. I don't think it's that finished and ready to go, and I think there's definitely massive improvements coming from system updates and just general patches and stuff that can come from teams. This is still very, very early days. And there are some very good titles. And there's titles that really highlight that there's much more to be done, like Black Myth Wukong, using the balance mode, which is the best one because it doesn't use generation techniques in terms of the performance mode, and obviously quality is capped at 30. We can see that, it flip-flops, anywhere between 35% and almost the same level of performance of what we see on the PS5. And that is that artificial cap of 45 FPS, oddly enough. So that limits what can get out of that balance mode. It literally is a balance mode. It's half the rate between 60 and 30. So I don't think they thought about that long and hard, but it doesn't really stand out as a massive improvement. Image quality looks slightly better, but that's really about it. And performance is slightly better, but you're not really going to see the headroom there. And there does need to be more work within the engine to get better performance out of it. Star Wars Outlaws is another one that's an odd one. The performance is all over the place. They've removed all modes. You've now got one single mode that merges performance and ray tracing into one. It's 60 FPS. It's using FSR2, it looks like, still to me, and the image quality is slightly better, but probably similar to quality mode, and it still has heavy dips. Although the CPU side in the towns, again, is another example where it's significantly faster. It still tears, and it still has some dips. Well, it didn't tear on the PS5, which is odd. Again, this points to the fact that the environment's not quite stable yet. It still tears on this, and it didn't tear on the PS5. I think it only tore on the Series X. But here, CPU-bound sections within these town centres, it's massively increased again, and that points to its data. As I always say, but people lump CPU as one, but it's usually data management and access times. There's probably an area of improvement there, and this seems like a game that's probably improving from cache improvements or cache optimizations that's going on the PS5 Pro. So we're definitely seeing some benefit here on another title, but there's other titles such as Baldur's Gate 3, which doesn't look like it has any improvement really on CPU, or it's very small. It's basically a minor CPU boost or some other access that doesn't make much of a difference. So there's definitely areas that need to be looked at in more depth, and I would definitely be doing that. But overall, what's my final thoughts on the PS5 Pro? I think it's got potential to be great in terms of PSSR and the ray tracing improvements. We've seen very good examples here in like Alan Wake and F1 for ray tracing. PSSR's got legs. It'll consistently improve, not what it is now, and it's very, very early days. It'll improve a lot over the coming months and potentially even years. And we're going to see a lot of teams use that hardware and the collective hardware inside. The extra RAM's going to help. The improvement GPU is really going to help in terms of titles that are running on Unreal Engine, because they tend to struggle on everything at the moment. And there's some other nice to have features similar to the PS2 and the PS3 with smoothing of PS1 games. There's an enhanced image quality mode for PS4 titles you can turn on and off. It won't work on every game, it clearly doesn't work on every game, but Bloodborne is an example where it does work. It looks like a contact aware sharpening pass, so it's a sharpening filter that's running over the top of the image, and that improves the clarity. You can see zoomed in here, but I tested Bloodborne, it works. I tested Drive Club, didn't seem to work. Alien Isolation didn't seem to work. So there'll be a collection of games where it will and won't work, and it might even start messing with the image quality as well. So that'll be something I'll test in more depth. It's nice to have, and it does again show that there is potential that that could also improve, and they could do more and more with that over time to just enhance old PS4 titles, including and up to AI upscaling them if they've got the hardware in there with the PSSR within the operating system layer. So again, it's got potential. Do I think you should rush out and buy it now? No. Unless you are running a huge screen and you absolutely adore the highest image quality, then you are going to see improvements, but they're going to be few and far between at the moment. More patches are dropping. Literally, Final Fantasy VII only dropped the day before I finished this review, so I couldn't update it here in this review, but I'll be doing it very soon. That one is a significant, a huge leap in terms of image quality, and really highlights when a team didn't do a very good job on the image quality, how PSSR can come in and save the day. But I wouldn't rush out and buy the PS5 Pro just yet. You can't even get, well, in the UK you can't, an optical drive, which for me is an absolute must. I'm glad I bought mine early before it even came out, so I've got mine here for me. And that makes it an even more viable option because you've got all these disc versions that you can then lean into. And again, there's loads more that I'm going to dig into and I've already been covering. I just haven't had time to fit it all in this video. So the PS5 Pro is a wait and see from me. It looks great. It's got really good potential to be significantly better than the PS4 Pro. But right now, it doesn't feel like it's quite ready for showtime. Doesn't feel like the spotlight should be on it just yet. Maybe come Christmas, maybe come January, February, March next year when more games come out, more patches drop, brand new games land. We might see some real standouts in terms of how this hardware can be used, specifically first party. But right now, it's a wait and see from me. But then again, if you desperately want a nice updated console with the best image quality, faster loading and higher performance, then get in early while you can if the stocks do run out come Christmas. Who knows what's going to happen. Again, I'd like to thank PlayStation UK for sending me a review hardware. Apologies for getting this one out a few hours later than I originally planned, but I am a full-time guy. This is a part-time gig, and I have lots of work on all the time. I've just done other reviews elsewhere on IGN as well. Hopefully this has been enjoyable, it's been informative, and it's given you all the details you need prior to the console landing today, tomorrow, whenever you see this. And as always, I've got to shamelessly self-plug because no one else is going to do it. If you are at this point, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below. All that stuff helps the algorithm. Definitely subscribe to the channel to get my numbers up and keep me going because I'm independent. I do this as a side gig. Anyway, I'm out and I'll catch you guys and girls on the next one with more PS5 Pro action.